So I've previously covered some of the plot holes and glaring issues with the Adam and Eve narrative, and many people have pointed out that the Adam and Eve narrative probably could have just been an allegory and not meant to be taken literally. And this certainly could have been true. However, there are some notes from the story itself and from the Old Testament and the New Testament that would lead us to believe that it's best read as a literal story and not as an allegory. I'm going to cover 4 of those right now. The first is that the narrative is etiological in nature. That means it's designed to explain why things are the way that they are. This explanatory power rests on the fact that the narrative itself is true, or else it loses the explanatory power. In the story, we see in Genesis 3:16 that it gives the reason why women have painful childbirths. Also in 3:16, it explains why women are subservient and submissive towards men. Also in 3:14, it explains why snakes don't have legs and why there's such a tenuous relationship between snakes and human beings. It also states that Adam will have to work the ground and it will be toil for him in order to get the crops he needs to eat. So this also explains why mankind exists in a world that is seemingly created for humanity, but is so difficult to actually survive in. It also, of course, explains why human beings die. So on the very outset of the story, it seeks to answer questions that people have in real life, and the only way that these questions can be answered is by understanding that the story is in fact true. Now, the second point, there are genealogies that stem from Adam and Eve. Genesis 5 states, "This is the book of the genealogy of Adam, in the day that God created man. He created him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female. And he blessed them and called them mankind in the day that they were created. And Adam lived 130 years, and he begat a son in his own likeness." And the genealogy carries on. Of course, there would be no sense in making a genealogy from Adam and Eve all the way to Noah and henceforth if they were not in fact real people. Point number 3, New Testament theology greatly requires the Adam and Eve narrative to be true. For example, in Romans 5:12 through 15, we read, "Therefore, just as sin entered through the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned. To be sure, sin was in the world before the law was given." Of course it was, because Adam sinned. "But sin is not charged against anyone's account where there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, even over those who did not sin by breaking a commandment, as did Adam, who is a pattern of the one to come. But the gift is not like the trespass. For if the many died by the trespass of one man," that being Adam, of course, "how much more did God's grace and the gift that came by the grace of one man," so on and so forth. So sin entering through Adam is a very real thing, according to Paul. And of course, we read in 1 Corinthians 15:20 through 22, "But Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. For since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead came also through a man. For as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive." But there are other theologies that kind of rest on this. For example, the idea that women are supposed to be under the authority of man. In 1 Corinthians 11:7 through 9, "A man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. But woman is the glory of man. For man did not come from woman, but woman from a man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for the man." We read something similar to this in 1 Timothy 2:11 through 14. "A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet, for Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one who was deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner." So here, the letter to Timothy certainly would not have made any sense if this was a figurative story. One more passage in 2 Corinthians 11:2 through 3. This is Paul writing to the Corinthian church, stating that he is afraid that they are going to fall away because they are deceived. He says, "I promised you to one husband, to Christ, so that I might present you as a pure virgin to him. But I am afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunningness, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ." So, of course, this story of Adam and Eve was entirely true to Paul. And remember, We see even in the Gospels that the genealogy of Jesus is linked all the way back to Adam in the 3rd chapter of Luke. Now, the 4th point. Jesus seems to think that this was a literal story. Jesus doesn't mention the narrative often, only twice. But in Mark 10:4-6, he states, "They said, 'Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away. It was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote this law to you.' Jesus replied, 'But in the beginning of creation, God made them male and female,'" a reference to Genesis 5. In Luke 11:51, it states, "From the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who was killed between the altar and the sanctuary. Yes, I tell you, this generation will be held responsible for it all." So here is not a reference to Adam, but the son of Adam. So obviously, if Adam had a son and Jesus thought that son was real and that the blood that he shed was real against his brother, then obviously it would only make sense that Abel's father, Adam, and his mother, Eve, were also real people. And so there might be more passages that would lead us to believe that the Adam and Eve narrative are meant to be taken literal by almost all of the biblical authors. If I've missed something, please add it to the comments.